So just a heads up before I start, this will be one of my longer videos. Um, I think that's inevitable. I can't really see it being any other way because this is not the sort of video you could just make a snappy 5 minute little presentation. Um, there is a lot of things to discuss and I want to do it properly. So, feel free to multitask. That's what I do when I'm listening to other longer videos. Multitask, do the dishes, do something else while you're listening to this. But yes, it does need to be a slightly longer video, let's say 25 minutes or thereabouts, perhaps. I think we're in a potentially unusual situation this year, insofar as the British general election may coincide with the American presidential election. That's rare. Most British general elections, one notices, ends in odd numbered years, like sevens, fives, threes, ones. It's unusual to have a general election in the year ending in four. It's just something that I've noticed. But we may have a general election in October, and then the American elections in November. So, unusual situation. In 2017, it coincided with the French presidential election. Um, there is rumours swirling around Whitehall at the moment that there's going to be a leadership contest to Sunak. I think that would be madness for the Tories to do that. I think they'd be shooting themselves in the foot. And yes, most polls suggest Labour is on course to win comfortably, but the last thing I think the public would want to see is yet another unelected Tory leader. I mean, the sixth Tory Prime Minister in a row, and the fifth one to be unelected directly by the public. It's true that we don't have a presidential system, but I don't think that will go down well with the public. It would just look like the Tories are treating the office of Prime Minister as their personal plaything. Also, I don't like the idea of changing Prime Minister regularly because I think it makes us look weak internationally. We need some stability at the top. So I say, I mean, if I was a Tory, I'd say keep Sunak in, give him a chance in a general election, because I really don't think any other candidate would necessarily turn it around at this point. And I don't think a leadership change would help anyone. Incidentally, it is speculated that Biden may go through all the primaries and then he could be persuaded to reject the nomination. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's got a lot of pride, and it may be a mistake. But anyway, that's for American politics. So what I want to do in this video is talk about why I feel somewhat politically homeless. Now, that's not the same as being apathetic. I am anything but an apolitical person. I'm very political. I am a swing voter at the moment, and again, there's a misconception that swing voters don't know what they believe. On the contrary, I have very strong views. I'm realistic. I know that there'll never be a political party that I will completely agree with. Even many MPs, particularly in the two big parties, they certainly would not always toe the line, and then they'd have to defy the party whip. I think it's probably a good thing that big parties have some plurality of thought within them. But that's just a point I want to make, that being undecided is absolutely not the same as being apathetic. Now, some people say they don't vote at all, and I do understand this. I get it. They might think, well, what's the point? Nothing ever changes. I don't entirely agree with that, but I get the disillusion. I really, really do. The only point I would make is there are parts of the world where people don't have that right at all. They have no voice. So we may not have a great choice, but it is still a choice. And I would even say you can always put the option none of the above. I would just say the simple act of putting an X somewhere is a civic responsibility. To me, sort of saying, I'm not going to vote, it's I wouldn't go so far as what they do in Switzerland, making it illegal, but I would simply point out that people do not have this right in many parts of the world, and we do. So it's not something we should take for granted. That may not be a great choice, but it is still a choice. Just go show you two magazines, The New Statesman. I think this kind of sums up the situation. Who runs Labour? Shows Keir Starmer as a kind of puppet there. The Green Lobby, unions. Trouble in Toryland. So we have Mini Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss as the Mad Hatter, Kimmy Badenoch as, not sure who, she's meant to be the Cheshire Cat, I think. No, I think that's Nigel Farage as the Cheshire Cat. Little Mini Rishi Sunak, Suella Braverman, Boris Johnson as the Caterpillar. So yeah, it's as the party faces defeat, the blame game has begun, and I mentioned the leadership contest speculation. But as ever in Whitehall, it's hard to know what to believe. I do think if the Tories were to go for a leadership contest now, it would be madness. They'd be shooting themselves in the foot. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through the main parties and discuss them a little bit, how I feel about them right now. Like I say, I don't expect to find a situation where I absolutely agree with a political party, but I would at least like to be somewhat encouraged and inspired, and I'm not. I am feeling. I really don't know who I'm going to vote for. I might even go for the independent um, if we have one on the ballot. Some might say that's a wasted vote. Not necessarily. An independent can still do constituency work, still represent things in Parliament. I don't think it's a wasted vote. I don't think any vote is wasted if you believe in it. Um, Labour, I'll start with Labour because most polls suggest they are on course to win. I've noticed Starmer isn't complacent, that's probably sensible. Unless they have a major internal party scandal, I can't see Labour losing. It may not be a landslide, but I think it will be a majority. It may not be a huge majority, but I think it'll be a majority. I think we have a situation here where it's more that people are tired of the Tories rather than they've any great love for Labour. I mean, in 1997, there was genuine excitement and enthusiasm for New Labour. I don't think that is the case with Starmer's party at the moment. Um, Nevertheless, I think a lot of people are thinking, well, it's better of two bad choices. I think Starmer is probably capable. On a personal basis, he is definitely a much bigger improvement. He's a big improvement on Jeremy Corbyn. Now, what I would say to Corbyn's supporters, they're convinced it was a smear campaign and that's why he lost. He had two chances to go to the British public. Most party leaders only have one. Some of them don't even have any. But he had two chances, 2017 and 2019. The British public rejected Corbyn's Labour Party twice. Corbyn's worldview is toxic. This is a man who appeared on Russian and Iranian state media. He constantly played the devil's advocate for our adversaries, and never in his public life did Jeremy Corbyn defend the United Kingdom in foreign policy, not once. Corbyn was utterly unfit for number 10, and I'm pleased he lost. Keir Starmer, by contrast, I have no major concerns with Keir Starmer regarding foreign policy. I think he'll be consistently on par with standing up for Ukraine, for example. I think he will stand up to China. I hope he does. It remains to be seen to what extent. But one thing that does put my mind at ease is at least he won't be Jeremy Corbyn in foreign policy. The whole Gaza thing that's going on now is certainly a potential Achilles heel for Starmer, but it will remain to be seen what influence this has in the general election later in the year. Now, domestically, I do have significant concerns about Labour. Unquestionably, Starmer's Labour has pandered to woke ideology. Now, I made a video recently on Carol Vorderman, and I challenged her notion that the culture wars are just pushed by the right. It's the left that has coined such terms as critical race theory. It's the left that push divisive narratives like white privilege. It's the left that have threatened legislation over trans issues and want to lower the age for, who can get what with transitions regarding puberty blockers and all that sort of thing. All those things are very, might say that for Sunak to attack Starmer on, what is a woman is trivial and petty. But behind that political theatre, there are serious issues at stake here. Serious issues around free expression, for example. But that isn't a trivial issue. It's not a trivial issue that people's jobs are on the line. because they're frightened to say what they really believe. Um, and, I'll probably make a video on the controversial Scottish hate crime legislation that's been brought in by the SNP. Many critics say it's going to criminalise free speech. Humsa Yusuf insists it isn't. I'm not so sure. I'll probably make a video on that if I get a chance. But I am suspicious of Labour. I do think, given half a chance, they will increase legislation in these things. Recently, Angela Rayner said the Tories' legislation doesn't go far enough. I'm not sure specifically what she was referring to, but if that's talking about legislation on so-called hate speech, the big danger here is who gets to define hate speech. I mean, if someone says, I do not believe that a man can be a woman, so I do not believe that a transgender woman is a real woman, what's to say that legislation won't come in saying that's transphobic hate speech and that person should be fined? I mean, there's real dangers here with that sort of thing. I think people should be allowed to make controversial opinions. The only restrictions I think there should be on free speech is if there's explicit threats of violence, if there is issues around national security, i.e. if someone is being a propagandist for a foreign regime, or a foreign adversary, I should say, or if we're getting into targeted bullying of an individual where it's really, really targeted at that individual. But I think part of free speech is accepting that some people will have offensive or controversial viewpoints. And I really think that there's also, I mentioned the study recently on diversity and equality. Most respondents said that whilst people should be responsible in their place of work, what they say in their own time, I think it was 60% said that should not be something that, they should be allowed basically to say what they want in their own time, regardless of what company they're in. And I agree with that. I don't think, for example, if someone works for Tesco, they should be penalised because in their spare time they have a controversial view on something. Now, I suppose there's some caveats. If they're in a line of work, like the police, for example, that involves directly working with the community, and they have racist views, clearly that is a problem because it would, bring questions about their sort of judgment. If a judge has political views, that would bring questions into his or her judgment in criminal trials. But yeah, Labour unquestionably has a woke side, and the senior party figures will downplay this, but just watch the space for them bringing in more legislation. I have significant concerns about that. Keir Starmer himself has taken the knee. Recently they've sort of realised they need to be more about bread and butter issues. That doesn't go down well with the public. But I do not trust Labour when it comes to this issue. I think they will push identity politics. This is not to say every Labour MP has that mindset, but too many do, and too many party members do as well. That's something I do not trust. And I think we'll see Labour councils acting like mini tyrants in this regard. Crime, well, Labour's talked tough on this, and Starmer likes to make the point that he was head of public prosecutions, head of the CPS. True, he did prosecute terrorists, he was the head of the CPS, and he spoke very much like a lawyer early in his leadership, and that's now changed to be more like a politician. The problem here is actually that whether it's Labour or Tory governments, what they don't say, politicians will talk tough leading up to a general election, and it's not entirely a bad thing. It shows that they understand public opinion. But the problem here is when it actually comes to sentencing, the government of the day will say, well, we can't interfere with the judiciary. I wrote to the Ministry of Defence a while back, and I made this point about sentencing not reflecting public opinion, and the response I got was that sentencing has gradually increased. Like, I think the spokeswoman said it was 20% of cases are now longer sentences, but that's just not good enough. The Tories, and I'll come back to this point, they've been an overwhelming disappointment when it comes to law and order. But here's the thing. Legislators will say we can't interfere with the judiciary. Judges will say their hands are tied. The Sentencing Council will say they're just an advisory board, so it's a blame game. I think the legal establishment as a whole is arrogantly out of touch. I mean, why is it that someone who kills a person whilst drink driving, they might get a custodial sentence? Well, they probably will, but they're allowed to drive again. Why should they ever be allowed to drive again? They get a driving ban for 7 years. If you kill someone or seriously injure someone, I think you should be banned for life. Even if you don't kill someone, but you're blind drunk on a motorway or a road, any road, I mean, to me, that should be seen as a very, very grave thing. I'm not talking about doing 40 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. I'm talking about seriously reckless driving. Um, youth gangs, no real deterrent. They're running wild because they know there's no deterrent. Um, I'd like to see Labour cracking down on yob culture. Labour talk tough, but I am honestly not convinced a lot will change, because this is something that I think is almost beyond the power of politicians, because they will say they can't interfere in the judiciary. Now, that is important for democracy. You can't have the government dictating what is the outcome of trials. I accept that, because otherwise we'd have a situation like China. But I think the legal establishment needs to face a lot more pressure to answer to the public. Judges need to be more answerable to the public. The Sentencing Council, they talk about consultations. I don't think they go anywhere near far enough. The Court of Appeal, anyone can write to the Attorney General to refer a case for undue leniency, but how many of those cases does the Court of Appeal overturn? Not anywhere near enough. So I am convinced there is a disconnect between public opinion and the judicial establishment. I do think that they live in a bubble. I do think they are arrogant. I do think that they think they know best. And we'll play lip service to the public to some extent, but we'll largely ignore them. I don't think that's good enough, because it's the public that are affected by their decisions. Anyway, you can tell that's something I feel very strongly about. Well, I'm not convinced Labour's going to be much better. If they bring more police on the streets, more police on beats, that's a good thing. But I can't see it radically changing. I still think we will have a yob culture. Maybe that's something that will always be with us. But I want to see, for example, tougher penalties for young offenders who at the moment don't face any real deterrent. They don't. So there's things like that I'd like to see change. Islamism is a big issue I've got concerns about. I think it is a real threat to this country, and I do not trust Labour. We had a situation, I mentioned this before, the Batley Quran desecration controversy. If you don't know about this, a RE teacher was accused of insulting Islam because he'd mentioned the Prophet in his lesson. And since that happened, he has basically been under an assumed identity. There hasn't been a single arrest. Now, this gets into policing matters. It's not just about politicians, it gets into policing matters. But Labour councillors were talking about police involvement. Actually, there was two incidents. There was one with the teacher and one in another seat, again somewhere in Yorkshire, where a boy had been accused of stuffing a Quran. But Labour councillors were talking about drafting in the police to investigate this blasphemy for the hurt feelings of Muslims. Keir Starmer has to unequivocally say, we do not have blasphemy laws in this country. And as Prime Minister, I will never humour this idea. He has to unequivocally stand up for free speech, which includes the right to question religion. I do think there are Islamists in Labour ranks. Now, Lee Anderson got into hot water for saying that Starmer and Khan are controlled by Islamists, and it could maybe be seen as slanderous to libelous, no, spoken so slanderous to fellow politicians, but is there some truth in it? Is there too much influence in the Labour Party from Islamists? I mean, there are a lot of there's a big Muslim base within the Labour Party. Now, to what extent is that Muslim base Islamist? Not every Muslim's an Islamist, but some are. Some will react violently to perceived insults to Islam. They are deeply intolerant on that issue. So the question here is, to what extent is Islamism an influence in the Labour Party? I want to see Keir Starmer publicly talk about the problem of Islamic extremism and his reaction to the Lee Anderson story. Now, if he was simply defending himself, I would understand that. But his attitude was, this shows the Tories haven't changed on racism. So he is associating Anderson speaking of Islamist ideology with racism. That really taps into Starmer's thinking and the left's thinking, namely that they conflate so-called Islamophobia with racism. That is a very serious problem because it silences legitimate debate about this. So I want to see Starmer answering that. I want to see Starmer saying, yes, it is legitimate to talk about this problem. So that's a big concern I have with Labour. Um, I think that his party will definitely be better than it would have been under Corbyn, but that is a very low bar. So if there is something I hope that happens, and this is more a hope rather than what I'm observing, um, I criticised Rachel Reeves when she done that U-turn, and I stand by that. I think it was a disgraceful U-turn. She criticised the Tories for not capping banker bonuses, and now she's saying that she's pro-growth, and she's not going to do that. She claims it's about the Great Recession, but no, you're a hypocrite, Rachel Reeves. You can't attack the Tories for that. Then you're going to propose to do exactly the same thing, i.e. not cut bonuses. But one thing she was right about was to say that New Labour did leave people behind. It didn't do enough to help the marginalised of society. So if we are going to have a Labour government, the left-wing side of me wants to see them doing things that Labour should do, standing up for workers' rights within reason, i.e. not backing wildcat strikes, but definitely, standing up for things like the minimum wage, worker rights in terms of how people are treated in the workplace, things like that. Those are the sort of things you would expect Labour to be on the side of. Um, I also want to see less stigmatising language of the unemployed. Under New Labour, the controversial workfare programme was in place. I know because I went through it. In 2009, that was under Gordon Brown's government. So this isn't purely a domain of the Tories. And now I'm going to move on to the Tories. And I'll start with that negative. I do not like how the Tories stigmatise the unemployed. They will deny this. They will say they're trying to help people back into work. But the way Jeremy Hunt was speaking recently, the way people like Mel Stride, Work and Pension Secretary, Laura Trott, her comments about the unemployed, I do not like the Tory attitude to the unemployed. And I think there's a sort of survival of the fittest mindset in Tory ranks. It's this mentality that let's just be stoic and it's stiff upper lip, and it's. I think there's an empathy deficit there, and I want to be careful how I say this. I'm not saying that individual Tories aren't decent people. I'm not saying, of course, there will be Tory voters who are generous to charity and they're individually compassionate, but there is a mindset both at parliamentary level and among Tory voters of one size fits all. Or if someone is struggling, whether they be unemployed or homeless, there is this attitude it must be their own fault. So a lot of Tories will think an unemployed person's just lazy, or a homeless person must be a junkie. I do think there's this mindset among a lot of Tories. I think there is an empathy deficit. One of the arguments for the large number of people now on incapacity benefit, or one of the arguments against it rather, is, oh, well, life is tough. Life has ups and downs, and they're just using it as an excuse. There may be some truth in that. Perhaps the mental health argument is overused, but we also understand mental health better than the past. So they're disregarding that. Um, I mean, one thing the Tories have improved is no one can accuse them of not being diverse. The most diverse governments in history have been in recent years: Johnson, Truss, and Sunak. More ethnic minorities, 3 women prime ministers. So Labour knows they can't point the fingers at the Tories in that regard. But, and I'm up at the 25-minute mark now, so I'm going to round this up as soon as possible. Um, the Tories do, I think, have a sort of survival of the fittest mindset. I mean, their attitude to the unemployed is they're getting money from the state, so we have to make it tough for them. And it pisses me off, quite frankly, because what Jeremy Hunt didn't say was there's already a sanction culture in place. Claimants already are threatened with sanctions. There's been cases of people who are terminally ill told that they're fit to work. Hunt hasn't addressed that. Neither is Mel Stride or any other Tory that wants to, make things harder for the unemployed. And they'll never admit that. They'll say they want to help people back into work. But they talk down to the unemployed. They say things like, we're going to help people back into work. But, if you are stigmatizing people, if you are making people feel like they're criminals when they haven't committed a criminal offence, because I think Tories basically see claimants as one and the same as criminals, in everything but name, it really pisses me off. That's one thing that would stop me voting Tory. They would never use the same language about bankers, So I do think there is a part of the Tory mindset, and I don't care if they come from a working class background or not. There is a survival of the fittest mindset there. I see it, and it's something that puts me off the Tories. It's kind of this idea that anyone who's struggling in those areas, on the margins of society, must be their own fault. I think there is an empathy deficit. Now, on the plus side of the Tories, I do like the fact that they have stood up to woke intolerance. I do like the fact that they haven't jumped on the bandwagon with that. Dominic Raab said, the only people I kneel to is my wife and the Queen. So it is refreshing. I do like that the Tories have rejected aggressive critical race theory and so on. That is refreshing. And I am a little bit concerned that when they lose power, we're going to see a lot more of that. It's true that the Reform Party also stands up against this stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of other issues I haven't even mentioned, like immigration, and there's simply too much to mention in one video. I'm going to wrap this up by talking about some of the smaller parties. They've no chance of winning. Lib Dems, I think they're Labour light. Now, my local Liberal Democrat councillors are actually pretty good, and I tend to vote for them because they do hard work. They have advocated for things that I agree with, like trying to bring back our cinema. So I'll probably vote for them at local level. But I'm not impressed by Ed Davey. I think he's even more woke than Keir Starmer. Not impressed. SNP, well, it's the Scottish National Party. I've been pretty clear I'm a staunch pro-unionist. But even without the nationalist thing, I think Humza Yousaf's party has been pushing quite a hard left agenda. This new hate crime legislation they're pushing, I really look into that. I might make a video specifically about it. The Greens, I do not take seriously. Unlike their counterparts in Germany and some other European countries, they're a small party, and I think they're actually quite extreme. I mean, their endorsement of Just Stop Oil says it all. Incidentally, I like the fact that Keir Starmer has rebuked Just Stop Oil, but they should return the donations they've got from figures connected with Just Stop Oil. Also, Starmer has to explain why he's against the deporting of foreign criminals. There's a lot of ins and outs here that I haven't covered everything, but that's how I lie with this. So I am in no rush to vote either Tory or Labour. And I wish I could be more confident. I wish I could say, yes, I'm excited about this, but I'm just not. The predominant thing on the Labour side is woke ideology. The predominant thing on the Tory side is I think that there is, I do think ultimately they will stigmatise the unemployed, but they will not stigmatise greedy energy companies. There is a mindset, I think, with Tory politicians that, wealth is good, and it just doesn't sit well with me. People could say I'm playing class wars there, but I see this. It's my honest opinion. I do not like the way they stigmatise claimants. Because believe me, anyone who's been through that system will know it's no picnic. People have been driven to suicide by workfare, by the sanction culture, and it disgusts me that the Tories push this. And I want to see Labour. If I'd like to see Labour being different from the Tories in one regard, it would be that. And I'll wrap this up. Foreign policy, I don't think there'll be much difference, and that's a good thing. I think Starmer will continue to support Ukraine. But he's been treated as a Prime Minister in waiting, so I think that's what we're going to see. No doubt there'll be more videos to make about this closer to the time, and with that said, I'll wrap this up.